1858, a plantation in the American South, and one request that no one in that house would ever forget. The master's young wife looked across the room, straight at a slave. "Samuel," she said quietly, "carry me upstairs." The servants froze, because everyone in that plantation understood something dangerous. A slave alone in the mistress's bedroom could ruin a man's life. Samuel lifted her carefully. Step by step, he carried her up the staircase. Then the bedroom door closed behind them. But the real shock came later that night, when the plantation owner returned home and revealed a secret buried inside the Whitmore family for more than 20 years. A secret that suggested something impossible. The slave everyone called Samuel might share the blood of the Whitmore family itself. The Whitmore plantation stood along a wide river in the southern countryside. From far away it looked peaceful. Tall oak trees, wide cornfields stretching toward the horizon, and the large white house standing above everything else. But anyone who lived there knew the truth. Plantations were quiet places, full of secrets. Samuel had lived on that land for most of his life. No one remembered exactly when he arrived. Some said he had been brought there as a small boy. Others believed he came from another plantation many miles away. Samuel himself remembered almost nothing, only fragments. A woman's voice, the smell of smoke, and a long, dusty road. By the time he became a grown man, he was already known across the plantation. Tall, strong, quiet. Samuel rarely spoke unless someone asked him something. But when he did, his voice was calm and steady. The other workers respected him, not because he fought, not because he argued, but because he carried himself with a strange dignity, even in a place designed to take dignity away. Inside the big house lived Eleanor Whitmore. She had arrived only 2 years earlier, the young wife of the much older plantation owner. The servants noticed something about her almost immediately. She was not cruel, not the way many plantation wives could be, but she was lonely, the kind of lonely that large houses sometimes create. Many evenings she stood at the upstairs window, watching the workers return from the fields at sunset. And sometimes her eyes followed Samuel. No one spoke about it. No one dared. Because on a plantation, some things were safer left unspoken. Until the night everything changed. The night Eleanor Whitmore slipped on the staircase. The night the doctor ordered her to stay off her feet. And the night she looked across the room, straight at Samuel, and said the words that would start it all. "Samuel, carry me upstairs." Samuel moved slowly toward the staircase. Eleanor rested carefully in his arms. The house was silent, so silent that every step on the wooden stairs seemed louder than it should. The servants downstairs pretended not to look, but everyone was listening, because moments like this could change lives. Eleanor held lightly onto Samuel's shoulder as he climbed. From this close he could feel how fragile she seemed, very different from the distant woman who usually walked through the house like a shadow. The oil lamps along the wall flickered softly. Their light stretched long shadows across the staircase. When they reached the top step, Samuel paused in front of the bedroom door. He hesitated. "You may bring me inside," Eleanor said gently. Samuel pushed the door open with his shoulder. The room smelled faintly of lavender and candle wax. He carried her to the bed and lowered her carefully onto the edge. The moment she was steady, he stepped back immediately. His eyes dropped toward the floor. That was the rule. Always step back. Always keep distance. Always remember your place. But Eleanor did not look away. Instead, she watched him quietly, as if she were noticing something for the first time. The wind moved softly through the curtains beside the window. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then Eleanor broke the silence. "Samuel." "Yes, ma'am." The doctor left bandages on the table. She nodded toward a small wooden desk beside the bed. "Could you bring them here?" "Of course, ma'am." Samuel crossed the room and picked up the cloth bandage. When he returned, Eleanor lifted the edge of her dress slightly to reveal her injured ankle. Samuel knelt beside the bed. His hands moved slowly, carefully. He wrapped the bandage with steady precision, making sure the cloth was firm but not tight. Eleanor watched him the entire time. "You are very careful," she said quietly. Samuel kept his eyes lowered. "I'm only doing what I was told, man." Another silence followed. Longer this time. More uncomfortable. Outside, distant thunder rolled across the fields. A storm was building. When Samuel finished tying the bandage, he stood up again, already preparing to leave. But Eleanor spoke again. "Samuel, wait." He stopped instantly. "You work a great deal on this plantation," she said slowly. "Do you ever rest?" Samuel hesitated. "Not much, man." A sad smile crossed her face. "This house is very quiet," she said. "Too quiet sometimes." Samuel did not answer. Conversations like this made him uneasy. Then Eleanor surprised him again. "You may sit for a moment." She pointed to a chair beside the window. Samuel looked confused. No servant sat in the mistress's room. Not ever. "It's all right," she added softly. "I asked you to stay." Slowly, Samuel walked to the chair and sat down. But he stayed at the very edge of it, ready to stand again if needed. For a few minutes they spoke quietly. About the weather. About the river near the plantation. About the endless corn fields outside. It was the strangest conversation Samuel had ever had inside that house. Not commands. Not orders. Just words. Then suddenly, a door slammed downstairs. Heavy footsteps echoed through the hallway below. Samuel stood up instantly. He already knew that sound. "Master Whitmore," he said quietly. Eleanor's face turned pale. Her husband had been away for several days. No one expected him to return tonight. The footsteps moved closer. Slow. Heavy. Samuel stepped toward the door. "I should go, ma'am." But before his hand touched the handle, the bedroom door burst open. Master Whitmore stood in the doorway. Rain soaked his coat. Water dripped from the brim of his hat. His eyes moved across the room. First to Eleanor sitting on the bed. Then to Samuel standing inside the room. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to stop the air itself. "What is this?" Whitmore asked slowly. Samuel lowered his head immediately. "Sir," he said quietly, "I was only helping the mistress with the bandage." Whitmore did not answer. He stepped slowly into the room. The floor creaked beneath his boots. Rainwater dripped from his coat onto the wooden boards. His eyes moved carefully across the room. First Eleanor on the bed. Then Samuel standing near the door. Then the bandage around her ankle. "You asked him to bring you here," Whitmore said. "Yes," Eleanor answered calmly. "My ankle is injured. The doctor told me not to walk." Whitmore studied her face, looking for something hidden, something dishonest. Then his eyes returned to Samuel. Sharp, careful, suspicious. "How long were you in this room?" he asked. Samuel answered without hesitation. "Only a few minutes, sir." Whitmore said nothing. He walked toward the window and looked out at the dark plantation. The rain was falling harder now. For years he had owned that land. Every field, every building, every person working there. Nothing on that plantation escaped his attention. Finally he turned back towards Samuel. His voice calm, too calm. "Leave us." Samuel nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." He stepped past Whitmore and into the hallway. Behind him the bedroom door closed slowly. Downstairs the servants were already whispering. Everyone had heard the door open upstairs. Everyone had heard the master's voice. Old Martha stood near the kitchen doorway. Her eyes followed Samuel as he came down the stairs. "What happened?" she whispered. Samuel shook his head. "Nothing. Just helping the mistress." But even as he said the words he felt uneasy. Because on a plantation, the truth did not always matter. Outside the rain had turned into a heavy storm. Lightning flashed across the distant fields. Samuel walked toward the stable and sat beneath the shelter of the roof. He stared out into the darkness. Something about the master's expression had troubled him. It was not anger. Not exactly. It was something else. Something colder. Upstairs, inside the bedroom, Whitmore stood with his arms crossed. The room was quiet except for the rain tapping against the windows. "You seem very comfortable asking the servants for help," he said slowly. "My ankle is hurt," Eleanor replied. "The doctor told me not to walk." Whitmore walked slowly toward the bed. His sharp eyes studied her face. "I return home early," he said, "and the first thing I see is that young man standing in my wife's bedroom." There was nothing improper, Eleanor said firmly. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Then Whitmore said something unexpected. "You believe I am worried about scandal?" Eleanor frowned. "Then what are you worried about?" Whitmore stopped beside the bed. He looked directly into her eyes. "That young man. Samuel." Whitmore paused, as if choosing his words carefully. "There is something about him you do not know." Eleanor felt a strange chill. "What do you mean?" Whitmore let out a slow breath, like a man finally speaking about something buried for years. "Samuel did not arrive here the way people believe." Eleanor leaned forward slightly. "What do you mean?" "My brother brought him here many years ago," Whitmore said, "when he was still a child. And before my brother died," Whitmore continued, "he told me something." Eleanor's voice dropped. "What did he say?" Whitmore glanced toward the door, making sure no one could hear. Then he spoke quietly. "He believed the boy's mother once worked in this house." Eleanor waited, and Whitmore's voice lowered even further. "My brother believed Samuel might be connected to this family, in a way no one has ever spoken about." The room fell silent. Eleanor stared at him, confused, uncertain. "Connected how?" she asked slowly. Whitmore looked directly into her eyes. "My brother believed Samuel might be the son of someone from this house." The words hung in the air, heavy, uncomfortable. Eleanor stared at Whitmore, trying to understand what he meant. "The son of someone from this house," she repeated quietly. Whitmore nodded once. Slowly. "My brother believed it for years," he said. "But he never proved it." Eleanor's mind raced. The possibilities were unsettling. "Whose son?" she asked carefully. Whitmore did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked toward the fireplace. The embers glowed faintly inside the dark hearth. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed, lower, heavier. "My brother believed the boy's father was our own father." Eleanor felt the room grow cold. "If that were true," she said slowly, "Samuel would be." Whitmore finished the thought. "My half-brother." The storm outside seemed louder now. Rain struck the windows harder. For years the plantation had lived under a simple order, masters above, workers below. But the thought now filling the room threatened that order completely. Eleanor broke the silence. "Does Samuel know?" Whitmore shook his head. "No. And he never needed to." Eleanor looked at him sharply. "He deserves to know who he is." Whitmore gave a bitter smile.
You do not understand this land. If word spreads that a man working in the fields carries Whitmore blood, nothing here will remain the same. Eleanor watched him carefully. For the first time she saw something in his eyes she had never noticed before. Fear. Not fear of Samuel. Fear of the truth. Later that night, Eleanor made a decision. She asked one of the servants to bring Samuel back to the house. Samuel entered quietly, removing his hat as he stepped into the front room. Whitmore stood near the table. Eleanor sat beside a dim lamp. Samuel looked between them, unsure why he had been called. "You asked for me, sir," he said. Whitmore studied him carefully, longer than usual. Now that the thought had been spoken aloud, he noticed details he had ignored for years. The strong jaw, the shape of the eyes, the quiet confidence in the way he stood, details that looked strangely familiar. Samuel waited patiently. Finally Eleanor spoke. Her voice gentle. "Samuel, there are some things about your past we are trying to understand." Samuel looked confused. "My past, ma'am." Whitmore stepped forward slowly. "For many years," he said, "everyone believed you arrived here as a child from another plantation. But that story may not be true." Samuel frowned slightly. "I don't remember much before I came here." Whitmore nodded. "That is exactly the problem." He took a slow breath, the weight of years pressing on his words. "Samuel, there is reason to believe you were born closer to this house than you realize." Samuel stood still, trying to understand. Whitmore continued, "Your mother once worked here. And according to my brother, your father may have been a Whitmore." The words settled heavily in the room. Samuel did not move, did not speak. The quiet man who had spent his life working the fields suddenly felt the ground shift beneath him. Because if what the master said was true, then everything he believed about his life was about to change forever. Samuel stood in the middle of the room. The words he had just heard did not feel real. For most of his life he had known only one truth. Work. Obey. Do not ask questions. Now suddenly the past he never understood was standing directly in front of him. "My mother," Samuel said slowly. "I never even knew her name." Whitmore answered quietly. "Her name was Isla." Samuel repeated the name under his breath. Isla. It felt unfamiliar, yet strangely close. Eleanor watched him carefully. She could see the confusion in his eyes, the weight of a truth arriving far too late. Whitmore spoke again. "My brother believed our father may have been responsible. He was never completely certain. But the resemblance was enough to trouble him." Samuel looked down at the floor, trying to understand what it all meant. If the story was true, then the life he had lived on that plantation had been built on a terrible contradiction. A man working the fields, who might share blood with the family that owned the land. Samuel lifted his head slowly. "What happens now?" Whitmore did not answer immediately. For years he had buried this possibility, pretended it did not exist. But now the truth had been spoken aloud, and silence could not hide it anymore. Finally he said, "Nothing changes tonight. But things cannot remain the same forever." Eleanor looked between the two men. For the first time she realized something important. Samuel had always carried himself with quiet dignity, not like a man who believed he was less than others. Now she understood why. Samuel nodded slowly. "I do not know if what you say is true, but it does not change who I am." The words surprised Whitmore. Many men in Samuel's place might have reacted with anger or disbelief. Instead, Samuel remained calm, the same steady man he had always been. Whitmore studied him for a long moment. Then he said something unexpected. "My brother once told me something before he died. He said if the truth ever came out, the boy should be given the chance to choose his own future." Eleanor looked at him. "You never told anyone that." Whitmore shook his head. "No, because I never believed the moment would come." Outside, the storm had begun to fade. The rain softened against the windows. Samuel stood quietly. The room felt different now, as if the house itself had heard the truth. Whitmore finally spoke again. "You will not return to the fields tomorrow." Samuel looked surprised. "There are matters we must investigate," Whitmore continued. "If you truly carry Whitmore blood, your place on this land cannot remain the same." Eleanor felt something shift in the air. Not justice. Not yet. But the beginning of something that had never been allowed before. Truth. Samuel nodded slowly. "I only ask one thing." Whitmore raised an eyebrow. "What is that?" Samuel answered quietly. "I want to know who my mother really was." Whitmore looked toward the dark window. Somewhere beyond the fields. Somewhere in the buried past of the plantation. "Then that is where we begin." And on that stormy night in 1858, a secret hidden inside the Whitmore house for more than 20 years, finally began to rise into the light. Because sometimes, the biggest stories begin with something very small. A single moment. A quiet request. "Samuel, carry me upstairs."